Gail Street, and welcome to Paths to the Present. I'm here at Chestnut Lodge in East Rockville. It's been vacant about 2 years. However, this building, along with the structures around it, have a rich history. For decades, this campus served as a psychiatric hospital, providing treatment for countless patients as well as training for medical professionals. It can be said that the history of Chestnut Lodge begins in 1873, when the metropolitan branch of the B&O Railroad came to the town of Rockville. That development set the stage for buildings like the one you see behind me. When the metropolitan branch of the B&O Railroad opened a station here in Rockville, this community became a summer destination point for city dwellers. To accommodate them, several hotels were built in the area. One of them was called Woodlawn.
The Woodlawn Hotel was and still is a very grand hotel. In fact, it's the only one that's left of Rockville's hotels. And it was built around 1887 and took a while to get going, but by 1889, there are advertisements in the local papers, come out on the train and come out to these beautiful rolling hills above sea level and away from the mosquitoes of Washington in the summers, and we'll pick you up at the train station and bring you out here. And once you're out here, you'll be among the beautiful chestnut trees, and you could come into this gorgeous 4-story Second Empire-style mansard-roofed building and take a room here and spend a weekend, spend a couple of days, spend the entire summer, which people did, and it was only open in the summers or in the nice weather. And the advertisements talk about the amenities of electric lights and gas and water from artesian wells, which was fresh country water, and country vegetables around. And you know, here you are out in the country and you're getting out of the big city, and you and your family are enjoying yourselves.
But in less than 10 years, Rockville's resort boom was over, and the Woodlawn Hotel had to be sold. Ernest Bullard, a psychiatrist from Milwaukee, purchased the property in order to open up a psychiatric sanitarium. He renamed it Chestnut Lodge for the 125 chestnut trees that surrounded the main building at the time.
The family came in 1908. They took a couple of years to set it up and set up all the medical issues that were related to it and so on, and change it from a hotel into a patient hospital. I understand that they opened with 2 patients and expanded that to some 20 patients by the 1920s. There were obviously wonderful places for the patients to roam, and that was part of the therapy. They probably during those early years changed from having outhouses to indoor plumbing. The Bullards lived in the hotel on the first floor when they first came, and then after a while, I'm not sure exactly when, but after a while they built a cottage right behind the hotel for the family, and they called it Little Lodge, and lived there until 1935. So it was really one big family with the medical administrator and the physicians on staff and the patients.
Ernest's only child, Dexter, took over the institution after his father's death in 1931. Over the years, he ran it with a tight fist, working closely with his wife.
Dexter Sr. Married Ann Wilson from Kensington, and Ann came all the way from Kensington up to Rockville to live, and they had 4 children. They lived in Little Lodge for a while, and then they decided that they wanted to live a little bit farther away. It was becoming a little more professionally run, and there were more psychiatrists, more patients, and so on, so they moved to really what is the back farm to this property, fronting on Falls Road, a very old farmstead known as Rose Hill.
The Bullards moved to Rose Hill in 1935. James is their second son and was 2 years old at the time.
Because it was also an active working farm at that time with 12 to 15 milk cows, over 100 pigs, 400 chickens, it was a wonderful place to grow up because we had the farm life as well as the institution. I can remember cutting the alfalfa fields for 6 to 8 hours a day because they'd put up over 80 tons of hay in the barn for the cows over the winter. I knew many of the patients by name as I was growing up, and things became more formal when I began working as an aide I would work throughout high school. Every vacation in college, I would come back and work at the lodge. I learned years later that several of my babysitters, when my parents were tied up, were patients from Chestnut Lodge.
I'm here in the parlor of the main building at Chestnut Lodge. Imagine, if you will, this being the lobby of a stylish hotel. In fact, Chestnut Lodge began as the Woodlawn Hotel in 1889. Dr. Ernest Bullard took over the property in 1910 and turned it into a psychiatric sanitarium. In the 1930s, his son Dexter Bullard further transformed it into a nationally prominent psychoanalytic hospital.
When my father took over, he became very interested in the psychoanalytic theory and felt he could apply that to psychotic and borderline patients, which to some extent went against the philosophy of the rest of psychiatry.
This institution's success is due in part to this woman, Frida Fromm-Reichmann, a German Jewish refugee. She joined the staff at Chestnut Lodge in 1935 after Dexter Bullard agreed to build her this cottage. This wooden two-story Cape Cod is still known as Frida's Cottage. She lived here until her death in 1957. Throughout this time, the Bullards continued to develop and expand Chestnut Lodge.
Not only building other structures such as Little Lodge for themselves, but Upper Cottage. They moved to Rose Hill. They bought another farm beyond that that had been built and owned by the Karn family, K-A-R-N, and took over that. It was named the Maples when the Karns owned it. They renamed it Hilltop. Unfortunately, Hilltop doesn't exist today, but they owned the property all the way out to what today we know as Interstate 270, so it was quite a lot of acreage, almost 100 acres, I think. And on that, they built a number of buildings that complemented what they were already doing institutionally at Chestnut Lodge.
One analyst who was drawn to the lodge is Ann-Louise Silver. She began working there in 1975. Today, she is the president of the U.S. chapter of the International Society for the Psychological Treatment of the Schizophrenias and Other Psychosis. She says that even though Frida Fromm-Reichmann had passed away 20 years earlier, her presence at Chestnut Lodge lived on.
It was as if her ghost was there, her presence was there at the meetings. And her book, Principles of Intensive Psychotherapy, is still in print, available in paperback from University of Chicago Press. Everybody training in mental health then, and still very many people, have that assigned to them as required reading.
Dexter and Ann Bullard, along with Frida Fromm-Reichmann, built a national and international reputation that endured. Its annual symposia drew people from far and wide to share ideas.
At the heyday of the lodge as really the beacon for the world for psychoanalytically oriented work with severely ill people, there was a waiting list of 2 years for patients who wanted, or families who wanted their family member treated there. 2-year waiting list, and there was also a 2-year waiting list to come on the medical staff. So it really was an extremely special place, and kind of a hallowed grounds kind of feeling still persists.
The book, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, was written by Joanne Greenberg, a former patient of Fromm-Reichmann.
You can look in the archives of the Wednesday conference, and there transcribed is Frida saying, "And I said to her, you know, life isn't a rose garden. I never promised you a rose garden." And so that the title of the book came from what Joanne heard more than once from her therapist.
In 1969, ownership of Chestnut Lodge passed to eldest son Dexter Means Bullard, Jr., nicknamed Rusty. He continued to operate the lodge until his death in the mid-90s. By now, it was a 132-room facility. These modern dormitories were built for the patients. Inside, the rooms resembled apartments. In 1997, the property was sold to CPC Health, who maintained it as a psychiatric facility. Unfortunately, this was the beginning of the end for Chestnut Lodge. Ann-Louise Silver was still on the staff at the time.
Those final 4.5 years were extremely discouraging because really the CPC wasn't able to work with us. And there was a them-us mentality. They were getting into trouble. They didn't know how to do such and such, and they weren't there to work with us. So that we had the sense that we had answers, but we didn't have a listener. And the thing went downhill very, very, very quickly. It had been running at a profit at the time that CPC started, and 4.5 years it closed with CPC being $11.5 million in debt.
After declaring bankruptcy, Chestnut Lodge was sold to the Washington Waldorf School in 2001. Sadly, costs for the renovations exceeded the school's resources, and the property is on the market again. While the future of this facility is unclear, its significance to our community remains.
In addition to its history as a hotel and as a psychiatric institution over 3 generations, it is one of Rockville's grandest green spaces. The majestic trees, the open lawns, the beautiful hotel, the historic buildings in the back, all of that together makes a wonderful entrance into Rockville.
So, have you figured out this month's history mystery? A Civil War doctor used this bougie to measure the depth of a gunshot wound in order to learn the extent of the damage. Bougies were made in a variety of sizes for all types of wounds. That's all the time we have for this show. If you have comments for us or ideas for future shows, email us at paths-present@comcast.net. Be sure to join us next month when Paths to the Present takes a look at the development of fire stations in Montgomery County. See you then.